All right, I just got back from the fat trip and these were waiting for me in the garage. 2 weeks later, after I actually installed the bumper. All right, if you've been following along and you're here from part one, quick update. Bumper installed, winch installed. Everything looks good. Everything worked out great. Actually ended up taking it on the Florida Adventure Trail and it was a champ. I'm actually really glad that I installed this bumper and winch before that trip because during that trip, while we were hitting the trails, our friend Ben, who was riding in front of us at the time, ended up getting stuck in a mud hole. And because we now had a bumper and winch, we were able to extract them out of there. If we did not, well, that road is so narrow that there would have been no way for anyone behind us who had a bumper and winch to be able to pull in front of us to get him out of there. So I'm glad that we were able to use ours. But today we actually get to finish this front end facelift with some lights 2 weeks after the bumper and winch has been installed. If you remember from part one, the Lightforce Genesis that I absolutely love just did not fit. I am glad I was able to give them to Brad from Overlandaroo so he can install them on his vehicle and make a review video for that. But last night, the lights that Lightforce is sending me to replace those Genesis finally came in, and now I am really amped to get them on and show you how this whole thing just looks so amazing. But let me take you back to last night when I excitedly opened up the package and show you what lights I'm putting on. These are the Lightforce Strikers. Now a pair of them look pretty good, but you put 4 of them together and it just looks sick. I have always loved the look of like 4 pods just placed next to each other. It kind of sucks that the Genesis lights did not fit the bumper, but now that I see these in person, I might actually like this look a lot better. It's funny because when I told my wife that the Genesis lights didn't fit and I had to give them away and we're gonna put these ones on instead, she was like, I'm so glad, because as much as I like the Genesis, she said that she didn't want like humongous lights on the bumper. She wanted something more discreet, and this is just gonna fit that bill. Each light is 1 lux at 754 meters, 5,000 Kelvin in color temperature, and you have heard me speak about Lightforce color temperature before if you follow this channel. What I like about Lightforce is that they have their color temp down to a science. 5,000 Kelvin is basically like mimicking daylight, which means you're not gonna get this ultra bright white light that's just gonna probably fatigue your eyes. Having something that's like almost like daylight is gonna be just the right kind of temperature that's good on your eyes but gives you a ton of really good visibility. Each light is 60 watts. Input voltage range is about 10 to 30 volts. Current draw is 4.4 amps at 13.2 volts, and the LED estimated lifespan is 50,000 hours. Yeah, you're not gonna be using these up anytime soon. And each of these are about 2.2 pounds each, including the mount that it comes with. So they do have some heft to them. What I like also about Lightforce is that with their big lights, the HTX2, the Genesis, the Strikers, they don't have wires coming out of the back and then you have to connect them somewhere. You basically have the connector and you just plug them in to the back of their units. Meaning that if you need to do some maintenance, you need to take out some of the lights, then you don't have to sit there and trace the wire and see where it goes and then unplug it. You could just unplug it right from the back, do what you gotta do, put them back on and then plug them right back in. This is the dual set kit along with the installation harness. You get the light covers, and I'll talk about this in just a little bit. Lightforce sticker, registration card, user instructions. All right, you do get the full harness, but I am gonna be cutting this up because we do have a switch pod and I don't need a lot of the stuff that are on here. I just need the input that goes into the light. So I'm gonna be getting rid of the relay, the fuse, and even the switch that they give you. I'm not gonna be needing any of these. And then they also give you a whole bunch of zip ties for you to run your wires. And then finally, star of the show, you get the actual light itself. I mean, just look at these. There is some heft to this thing. It's rugged, and on the back, that's what I mean by plug and play. You don't have any wires coming out of this thing. You just plug your harness directly into that. And you also get these exchangeable covers, because if we don't need these, then I can protect the lens. You basically just take this one off, and then the other one pops right on, just like the HTX2s. And I think that on the 4Runner with this bumper, if my wife doesn't want to be running the look of the lights, we can basically just put these on and it'll just look a lot cleaner. Now, I could wait till tomorrow morning to install this thing, but I'm kind of excited, and I'm in the mood to install some stuff, even if it's like late. So let's go do that. I know I've talked about this to death in my past videos, but having a switch pod installed in the vehicle makes light installs that much easier. We don't need to run the entire harness with relays and switches. We simply just need the positive and negative wires to connect to each light and plug them directly to our switch pod. I'll put a link in the description on which system I'm running in the 4Runner. To prep it for the switch pod, we need to find the plugs that goes into the light and follow it until it goes to the relay and cut it from there. We keep those wires and discard the rest. Since I have 2 harnesses that goes to 4 lights, I need to do the same with the second harness. I'll save the rest of the harness in case I need it for future applications. Now I have 4 individual wires going to each light, and I don't need that many wires to go into one port of my switch pod. Normally, with past Lightforce harnesses I've had, they've had one wire coming out of the relay and then it splits into 2 lights. Unfortunately, this was not the case with this harness, so I'll need to combine 2 wires together to create 1 harness per pair of lights. To do that, I took 2 wires and cut them shorter, about a foot each, because each of these will connect to the other 2 longer wires. The lights will be close together on the bumper, so I just need enough wire that goes into one light to reach the other light next to it. I'll be using wire taps, so on the longer wire, I cut into the wire sleeve to expose a little bit of the wire underneath. When you cut the sleeve, be careful you don't nick the wires or cut into them and possibly create a short. Once combined, I now have a harness with a longer wire that splits to the 2 lights mounted next to each other. Now I just need to make another one. Before I permanently mount the lights, I want to make sure they're all working, so I'm going to plug the positive wires of both harnesses into the switch pod and then ground the negative wires to the vehicle. This particular switch pod does not have negative terminals, but fortunately, there is a ground terminal close to the switch pod that I use for this. With the wires plugged in, I plugged the wires into the back of each light, then ran my test. With the lights working, now I just had to run my wires to the bumper. The 4Runner has a ton of room to run wires to the front very neatly, which is what I love. Then I pushed each plug through the grill so that it's ready to be plugged into the lights and then mounted. Mounting the lights weren't too difficult because there are cutouts for a light bar that allowed me to access the bolts underneath, but it did take a while since it's a pretty tight space. Not to mention, Lightforce uses 17mm bolts and I don't have a socket that was long enough to thread each bolt all the way, so I just had to use a box wrench and turn it little by little in that tight space. Alright, since we're doing a front end facelift and I have my switch pod pretty much dismantled right now, plugging wires into it, might as well go ahead and install these. These are the Lightforce ROK40s in amber. They just look blue right now because there's a film over it. Now, Lightforce started doing amber sometime last year, and prior to releasing it in the US, I was very fortunate enough for them to send me one to put on the Jeep. I've already installed a pair of these on the Jeep. They are awesome, and now I'm glad to have a pair for the 4Runner as well. These are going to be our ditch lights. I am going to be replacing the last fit pods as well as the small diode dynamics ones that I had on the windshield before. I was running a 2-light system on the windshield because at the time I didn't have bumper lights, but now that we have lights on the bumper, then lights on the bumper as well as some ditch lights, I think that'll just take care of everything we need up in the front. I'm not going to do a full review on these. I've already reviewed these to death. In fact, there's an entire video dedicated to just these lights. If you want to watch it, I'll put it in the link in the description below as well as on the end card of this video. Same as the bumper lights, I'm not going to be needing a harness for this. I'm just going to need the wiring. We're going to plug it directly to the switch pod and we should be good. Now, I won't waste your time talking about the install of the new pod lights because lucky for me, the Deutsch connector plugs for the old pod lights also fits the connector plugs on the new pod lights, so the wiring was already there. It was just a matter of removing the old pods and the complete removal of the smaller lights and its wiring, and then mounting and plugging in the new pods. 7 weeks. 7 weeks from the time I purchased the bumper, took about a 5-week lead time, then 2 weeks to get the lights, and then finally everything is put together and finished. Even the marquee over there has a new message because I started filming a new video. Was it worth the wait? Yeah, absolutely. You know, upgrading the bumpers on our vehicle is like one of the first mod goals we have, right? Because let's face it, it makes the rig look cool. But outside of aesthetics, this past weekend just reminded me how important it is to have a very capable and very robust bumper, one that you can put a winch on, because you're going to end up needing it, especially when you're having to winch somebody out of a very sticky situation. I just really wish that the lights would have come in as well, because we did a lot of night trailing and we were just relying on the light pods that we had on the windshield, and it just wasn't enough. Had we had the lights that we have on here now, which look kick-ass by the way, then visibility would have just been that much better. Just a couple of notes. Adding a bumper and a winch to your vehicle is definitely going to add some weight. And prior to the installation, I did have a couple of concerns that I wanted to make sure I followed up on to see how much it affected it. Number 1, drivability. Number 2, miles per gallon. And number 3, front end droop. On the drivability side, I've seen people say that after you put a bumper and winch to the front of your vehicle, it's going to kind of veer a little bit because it's front heavy, and I did not notice that issue. It drives just like it always has. Now, as far as miles per gallon, prior to all this, we were averaging right around 19.8 to about 20.3. Keep in mind that we had recently also upgraded our stock tires to the Falcon Wild Peaks AT3Ws, which are a little bit heavier per tire. And then we also added a roof rack not too long ago, and sometimes there's cargo on that. After the winch and bumper install, we did see it drop down to 18.5. Not very significant, but yeah, there is definitely a drop. Now, as far as front end droop, prior to all this, I measured from the floor to the top lip of the wheel well, although in retrospect, I should have measured from the center hub of the wheel to the top of the wheel well. That way, it doesn't matter what terrain I'm on or what tire size I'm running, it probably would have been more accurate. But when I measured, it was 34 inches from the floor to the top lip of the wheel well, and I actually had a poll going with the guys, like, how much do you guys think this thing is going to drop? Everyone's telling me I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think it's going to drop that much. I was a lot more skeptical and thought it was going to drop like maybe 3 inches. Believe it or not, it didn't drop at all. I was still getting 34 inches, and I measured a couple days later. I even measured in different terrains. I measured yesterday and it was still like 34 inches. So I'm glad that it didn't affect that at all. Now, as far as the winch, I already know the winch is capable. I run the Apex Badland on the Jeep and I've had no problems recovering people with that. In this past trip, however, the vehicle we were trying to winch out was the one that was bringing us closer to them. But there are a ton of factors involved in that. Number 1, we were trying to winch out a very, very stuck vehicle, and it was like deep in the mud, and I know that there was some sort of vacuum that was going on underneath there that was making it very, very difficult. And number 2, we were trying to winch out an LX470. LX470s are not light vehicles. They're super heavy, not to mention that Ben, the driver of that vehicle, was carrying 2 storage bins of firewood. Like, he was in charge of firewood. That was just adding a lot more weight. Luckily, the kinetic rope worked. Thank God for kinetic rope, man, because that thing is magic. I am definitely getting myself one of those. John had the Voodoo kinetic rope, but if you have any suggestions on ones that you like, drop it in the comments below. And then number 3, we were also sitting on very slick ground. I mean, keep in mind, it had just rained, so there was a lot of mud everywhere, and we knew that no matter what we do, that stuck vehicle is just going to drag us to them. And then finally, the lights. It just looks so good. I'm actually really glad now that we went with the Strikers versus the Genesis. It just fits the line of that bumper so well. I'm just a really big fan of Lightforce stuff, you guys, and not just because I'm sponsored by them. Remember, it was me that went to them wanting to be sponsored because I've always been such a huge fan of their lights. I wish I could show you just how nice the output is on these lights. It's hard to show that with video, but if you were to see me in person and I lit it up, you would see just how it's so nice that it doesn't hurt your eyes. It's not blinding. It's the right kind of color temperature and brightness for the situation. Thank you, Lightforce, for not only outfitting the Jeep, but now outfitting the 4Runner as well. Your products on both these rigs just look really, really good. And I want to continue to rock and represent you guys for as long as I can, because you guys have not only been a great company to work with, but also just the quality of your products is just so superb. And also thank you to Harbor Freight for sending over the Apex Badland winch. You guys didn't have to do that. That was definitely a super nice surprise. I'm just glad that we now have the peace of mind with the 4Runner that we can help somebody out of a really sticky situation or even recover us if the need calls for it. But anyway, that's it. I don't know if you noticed some of the products that are sitting here on my workbench or even read the sign on the marquee, but I just finished installing MOLLE panels in the rear of the runner, both on the sides and a shelf. I think that's just going to help with all the organizational issues we had on this last trip. You're going to really like that video, so stay tuned. That comes out next week. But if you like this video, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and also consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to make more content like this. And as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Baptism Overland. My name is Asia Sampson, and I will see you next time. You hear this? Always renovations around here. I'm gonna move to the mountains and be a hermit.